Rome did not fall in a single night. There was no moment when people woke up and said, "The empire is over." Instead, they woke up, went to work, paid their taxes, and believed everything was fine. That is how it always begins. At the height of its power, Rome looked invincible. Its borders stretched farther than most people could imagine. Its armies were disciplined, feared, and seemingly unstoppable. Its cities were filled with marble, aqueducts, laws, and order. To the average Roman citizen, collapse was unthinkable. Empires don't die loudly. They decay quietly. And the most dangerous phase of any empire is not decline. It's normalcy during decline. Because when everything looks stable, no one feels urgency. No one demands change. No one prepares for what's coming. Rome had wealth flowing through its cities. Trade routes were active. Markets were busy. The government still functioned. On the surface, nothing appeared broken. But beneath that surface, something fundamental had already shifted. The system that once rewarded responsibility began rewarding loyalty instead. Competence slowly gave way to politics. Short-term comfort replaced long-term strength. And most people didn't notice because their daily lives hadn't collapsed yet. This is how historical blindness works. People don't compare the present to the past. They compare today to yesterday. And yesterday still looked fine. Rome didn't fall when the legions lost battles. It began falling when the idea of Rome stopped meaning sacrifice and started meaning entitlement. Citizens expected protection, food, and stability, but fewer were willing to contribute to sustaining it. Taxes increased. Currency was quietly devalued. Trust in leadership eroded slowly, not dramatically. None of this felt catastrophic in the moment. That's the trap. When decline happens gradually, it feels permanent, as if this new version of reality is just how things are now. No alarms, no panic, just adjustment. Rome adjusted again and again until adjustment became decay. And here's the most important part. Every major collapse in history follows the same opening chapter. Not chaos, not violence, but confidence. Confidence that the system will correct itself. Confidence that tomorrow will look like today. Confidence that someone else will fix the problem. Rome trusted its legacy to protect its future. That trust was misplaced. Because by the time collapse becomes visible, the conditions that cause are already irreversible. And Rome had already crossed that line, long before the barbarians arrived. The first cracks in Rome were not dramatic. They were administrative, financial, psychological, and that's why they were ignored. Rome didn't run out of soldiers first. It ran out of discipline. Military service, once seen as duty and honor, became something to avoid. Citizens preferred comfort to responsibility. So Rome adapted. Foreign mercenaries were hired. Loyalty was replaced with payment. Short-term solutions replaced long-term stability. It worked for a while, and that for a while is where empires die. At the same time, Rome faced a quieter problem. It was spending more than it could sustain. Wars were expensive. Public entertainment was costly. Bread and circuses weren't free. So the state did what states often do when growth slows. It didn't cut spending. It changed the money. Coins were diluted. Silver content was reduced. The currency looked the same, but it wasn't. Prices rose slowly. Trust declined silently. People felt something was wrong, but couldn't point to a single cause. This is how economic decay hides. No collapse, just confusion. Merchants raised prices. Soldiers demanded higher pay. The government responded with more controls, more taxes, more promises. Each fix created a new problem. Rome was no longer solving issues. It was managing symptoms. And still, life went on. Markets opened every morning. Temples were full. Officials gave speeches about stability and strength. From the outside, Rome still looked like Rome. But internally, incentives had changed. Political power mattered more than competence. Loyalty to leaders mattered more than loyalty to institutions. Truth became flexible. Whatever preserved order in the short term was considered acceptable. This is a crucial moment in every collapse, when a system stops asking what is right and starts asking what keeps things calm. Rome chose calm, and calm is dangerous because calm delays urgency. Calm convinces people that adaptation is working. Calm hides structural failure. By the time unrest appeared, Rome had already weakened itself. Its economy was fragile. Its army was fragmented. Its leadership was reactive, not strategic. But none of this felt like an emergency yet. People don't fear slow decline. They normalize it. Rome wasn't destroyed by enemies. It was hollowed out by compromise. And the worst part? Every generation believed the damage started before them and that it would end after them. That belief kept Rome standing, but empty. By the time the pressure finally came, there was nothing solid left to resist it. Once Rome weakened its foundations, something more dangerous happened. The system stopped serving the empire and started serving itself. Leadership became unstable. Emperors rose and fell at alarming speed. Some ruled for years, others for months, a few for days. Power was no longer earned. It was seized. The army, once Rome's shield, became a political weapon. Generals realized they didn't need Rome's approval, only the loyalty of their troops. And loyalty, once again, came at a price. This created a fatal loop. Emperors needed the army to stay in power. The army needed money to stay loyal. The state needed taxes to fund the army. So taxes increased, not on the elites, on farmers, merchants, ordinary citizens. Production slowed. Trade shrank. People abandoned land they could no longer afford to keep. As economic life contracted, the state tightened control. Price caps, forced labor. Mandatory professions passed from father to son. Rome was no longer a society of opportunity. It was a system of obligation. And obligation without hope breeds resentment. Cities became dependent on state distribution. Rural areas emptied. Local governance collapsed under pressure from the center. Rome centralized power to save itself, and in doing so made itself fragile. Because centralized systems fail all at once. At the same time, trust disappeared. Citizens stopped believing promises. Soldiers stopped believing commanders. Officials stopped believing data. Decisions were made based on fear, not reality. Short-term survival replaced long-term thinking. Every reform was rushed. Every policy was reactive. Every leader believed they were fixing the problem while accelerating it. This is when collapse becomes inevitable, not because of one mistake, but because correction becomes impossible. Any meaningful change threatens too many interests. Any delay makes the situation worse. Any action risks instability. So leaders choose inaction disguised as control. Rome didn't lack intelligence. It lacked alignment. And when alignment is gone, systems cannibalize themselves. By the time external pressures increased, border invasions, migrations, unrest, Rome could no longer respond coherently. It reacted in fragments. Different regions followed different rules. Different armies followed different leaders. Different laws applied to different people. Rome still existed on maps, but not in function. The empire wasn't collapsing outward. It was collapsing inward. And once a system turns against itself, no enemy is needed. Rome was not unique. It only feels unique because we remember it. But the pattern that destroyed Rome has appeared again and again under different flags, languages, and technologies. Every empire believes it is an exception. Every empire believes it has solved history. And every empire eventually discovers that human behavior doesn't change. Only the scale does. Take Byzantium. For centuries, it survived after Rome fell. But survival came at a cost. More bureaucracy, more taxation, more control. The state grew stronger on paper, and weaker in reality. Innovation slowed. Military spending consumed the economy. Trade routes shifted. Eventually, Constantinople became a symbol, impressive, sophisticated, and hollow. Then there was Spain. After discovering vast wealth from the New World, Spain made the same mistake Rome did. Easy money replaced productive growth. Debt replaced discipline. Inflation destroyed purchasing power. The empire looked powerful, but it was fragile beneath the surface. The Dutch Republic, the British Empire, the Soviet Union, different systems, same trajectory, expansion, peak complexity, debt, centralization, loss of trust, internal decay. Collapse is not an event. It is a process, and it always begins quietly, not with invasion, but with incentives breaking, not with chaos, but with stability becoming unsustainable. Empires don't fall because people stop believing in them. They fall because people can no longer afford to, when work no longer leads to stability, when rules no longer apply equally, when loyalty becomes transactional, when the future feels smaller than the past. That's when societies turn inward. People stop building. They start extracting. They stop cooperating. They start hedging. They stop trusting institutions. They trust themselves. This is the moment history pivots. Because once society reaches this stage, reforms become cosmetic. They look meaningful. They sound convincing. But they don't change incentives. And without changing incentives, nothing changes. Rome tried everything at the end. Currency reforms, administrative overhauls, military restructuring. None of it worked. Not because the ideas were wrong, but because they came too late. The system had already locked itself into failure. And that is the most dangerous phase of all. When leaders sense decline, but cannot reverse it. When complexity becomes a trap. When every solution creates new problems. When time itself becomes the enemy. Rome didn't collapse in a day. It simply reached a point where it could no longer adapt. Rome didn't collapse because people were foolish. It collapsed because people were human. They responded to incentives. They adapted to pressure. They chose comfort when sacrifice became too costly. And none of them believed they were living. At the end of an empire, that's the most unsettling part. Every generation inside a collapsing system believes decline is temporary. They believe stability will return. They believe reforms will work. They believe tomorrow will look like yesterday. Rome believed that too. But collapse doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself only in hindsight. When historians look back, the signs seem obvious. The debt, the debased currency, the bloated bureaucracy, the loss of trust, the reliance on force instead of legitimacy. But to the people living inside it, those signs felt normal. That's why history matters. Not as nostalgia, not as entertainment, but as a warning. Because Rome's story is not about Rome. It's about systems that grow too complex to sustain. Institutions that drift away from the people they serve. Economies that prioritize short-term stability over long-term resilience. And most importantly, it's about what happens when a society confuses survival with health. Rome survived long after it began failing, and that survival delayed urgency. Collapse didn't come from one decision. It came from thousands of small compromises, each one reasonable on its own, together irreversible. This is why studying collapse is uncomfortable. It forces a question no society wants to ask. Not will the system fail, but what stage of failure are we in? Rome never asked that question honestly. By the time it did, it was already too late. History doesn't repeat itself, but it follows patterns. And the purpose of understanding those patterns is not fear, it's awareness, because collapse is not destiny. But ignorance makes it feel inevitable. If you want to understand how power, money, and institutions truly work over time, not as headlines, but as cycles, then history is the only honest teacher we have. and this channel exists to unravel those lessons, one empire at a time. If this perspective helped you see history differently, you may want to stay curious. There's always more beneath the surface.